Chapter 1. The Iron Sovereign. Burn them all. The words fell from my lips like shards of ice hitting a stone floor. In the grand hall of the Citadel, the air was thick with the smell of rot and expensive incense. I sat on a throne carved from obsidian, feeling every bit as hard and cold as the rock beneath me. Before me, an elder with trembling hands pleaded for the lives of the infected. He didn't understand that mercy was a luxury this kingdom couldn't afford. After that, I watched as the council members exchanged nervous glances. They saw a king, but inside, I was a hollowed-out shell. 5 years ago, my mate fled, and she took my soul with her. Now, I rule through logic because my heart is a graveyard. "The Amber Plague does not care about your mercy, Elder," I said, my voice a low, dangerous rumble. "If they show the golden tint in their eyes, they are already dead. We contain the spread, or we lose the pack." Truth be told, the phantom ache in my chest was screaming. It was the silent bond, the place where Elara used to be. Every time I looked at a plague victim, I saw the color of her eyes, and it made me want to tear the world apart. Instead, I tightened my grip on the armrest until the stone groaned. Moments later, a messenger burst into the room, his face pale and slick with sweat. He tripped over his own feet before dropping to one knee. "Sire, the border guards. They caught a scent, a woman. They say it's the shadow healer." What's worse, the name sent a jolt of electricity through my spine. The shadow healer was a ghost, a legend who could cure the incurable. Because of that, the council erupted into whispers. "Is she coming to help? Or is she another rogue looking to profit from our death?" Varick, the Archduke, asked with a greasy smile. I stood up, and the room went silent. My cloak billowed behind me like a shadow. "I don't care why she's here. Find her. Bring her to me in chains if you must. Because if she could heal the plague, she could save my kingdom." But then, a deeper, darker part of me wondered if she was the answer to the hole in my chest. As the silence stretched, I dismissed them all. I needed to be alone before the ice in my veins started to melt. Chapter 2. Ghosts on the Wind. The balcony of the Blackwood Palace felt like the edge of the world. Below me, the city was a grid of flickering torches and rising smoke from the funeral pyres. Even so, I stood there, letting the biting wind numb my skin. I wanted to feel nothing. I needed to be the Iron Sovereign, the Alpha who didn't flinch. Without warning, the wind shifted. It wasn't the smell of smoke or the copper tang of blood that hit me. No, it was something impossible. It was the scent of clary sage and fresh rain, the exact smell of Elara's skin after a storm. At that moment, my heart skipped a beat. It was a physical blow that sent me reeling against the stone railing. "No," I hissed, my claws digging into the masonry. "You're hallucinating, Silas. She's gone." No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't push the scent away. It wrapped around me, a cruel memory playing tricks on my senses. Maybe it was fate, or maybe I was finally losing my mind to the feral descent. 5 years of silence, and now this? What followed was a surge of self-loathing so strong it tasted like bile. I was the Alpha King. I wasn't supposed to be haunted by a woman who chose the woods over my bed. Still, the scent lingered, taunting me with the promise of a life I'd buried. "General!" I roared, my alpha voice echoing off the obsidian walls. A beat later, my lead commander appeared in the doorway. "Yes, sire?" "Prepare the royal procession for tomorrow morning," I commanded, my eyes glowing a feral amber. "We rode through the city. We show the people that their king is not afraid of the plague," which meant I was really going out there to hunt a ghost. I told myself it was for the kingdom. I told myself it was to project strength. In fact, I was looking for a pair of eyes that haunted my dreams. That night, I didn't sleep. I paced the floor like a caged beast, my wolf pacing right along with me. We were both sniffing the air, waiting for the rain to return. As the sky darkened, I realized that if she was truly back, I would either kiss her or kill her. I just didn't know which would happen first. Chapter 3. The Amber Revelation. The streets of Blackwood were lined with the desperate and the dying, but they moved back like the Red Sea when my horse trotted forward. I wore my full armor, a mask of cold indifference fixed on my face. Still, my nostrils were flared, searching for that clary sage needle in a haystack of misery. Suddenly, the formation of the guards broke. Two small figures, no taller than my waist, darted through the legs of the horses. They were fast, unusually fast. Before she could move, one of my guards raised his spear to shove them back. "Stop!" I bellowed. The children didn't look afraid. Rather, they looked curious. They ran straight for my horse, their small hands grabbing at my royal cloak. The moment their eyes locked with mine, the world stopped spinning. They weren't just children. They had my brow, my jawline, and most importantly, they had my eyes. Two pairs of glowing, identical amber eyes stared back at me. As the silence roared, I felt the ice around my heart shatter into a million jagged pieces. "You smell like Mom's favorite sweater," the boy whispered, his voice small but clear. In the span of a breath, my wolf surged to the surface. "Mine." The word echoed in my skull until it was all I could hear. As the bond pulsed, I realized these weren't just orphans. They were my blood. They were my heirs. And just like that, everything changed. I looked up, scanning the crowd with predatory intensity. There, standing behind a stone pillar, was a woman wrapped in a heavy, tattered cloak. Without thinking, I swung down from my horse. The metal of my greaves hit the cobblestones with a deafening clang. "Elara?" As if summoned, she stepped out into the light. She looked older, tired, and her scent was heavily masked by herbs. But it was her. Between them, something cracked. The betrayal, the anger, the 5 years of agony. It all crashed into the present moment. "Stay away from them, Silas," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. What's worse, I saw the fear in her eyes. She thought I was the monster the council told her I was. In fact, I was just a father who had been robbed of his life. Before the words left her lips, I moved. I didn't care about the crowd or the plague. I only cared about the truth. The crowd was whispering, a low hiss of scandal and shock that filled the narrow street. I didn't care. I reached out and grabbed Elara's arm, my fingers circling her wrist. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she gasped, her eyes widening. "You lied," I growled, my face inches from hers. "You told me you were alone. You fled while carrying my blood." "I did what I had to do to keep them safe," she hissed back. She didn't know what scared her more, my rage or the way her body was still responding to my touch. Even so, she tried to pull away. Because of that, I felt the alpha inside me snap. I didn't want to hurt her, but I needed the truth to be laid bare. "Show me your face," I used the alpha voice. It was a command that forced the bones to obey, a psychic weight that crushed any resistance. As if pulled by a string, her hand went to her hood and pulled it back. Her hair spilled down her shoulders, and for the first time in half a decade, I saw the face of the woman I loved and hated in equal measure. What followed was a heavy silence. The people of Blackwood saw their dead queen. The council members at the back of the procession looked like they'd seen a demon. More importantly, the children moved closer to her, shielding her with their small bodies. "Don't hurt Mommy," the girl cried. Deep down, she knew the truth, and so did I. These children were the only thing that mattered now. Yet, the political implications were a nightmare. A rogue Omega returning with the king's bastards during a plague? Varric would have her head by sundown. "Get them in the carriage," I ordered the guards, my voice cracking with suppressed emotion. "Now." "Silas, please," Elara whispered. Just like that, the Iron Sovereign returned. I couldn't let them see me weak. So, I turned my back on her and climbed onto my horse. "You are coming to the Citadel, Elara, not as a guest, as a prisoner of the crown until this is settled." Beneath the moonlight of my own dark soul, I knew I was lying. She wasn't my prisoner. She was my heart, and I was never letting her go again. As the truth unraveled, I realized the war had just begun. Chapter 4. The Gilded Cage. The iron gates of the Citadel groaned shut behind the royal carriage, sounding like the closing of a tomb. I paced the length of the marble hallway outside the healer's wing, my boots clicking rhythmically against the floor. What followed was a silence so heavy it felt like it was crushing my lungs. Inside those rooms, Elara was with the twins, and for the first time in 5 years, my palace didn't feel like a hollowed-out cave. Because of that, my wolf was restless, pacing behind my ribs and scratching to get out. He didn't understand politics or betrayal. He only knew that his mate was within reach. Yet, the man in me remembered the empty bed and the cold nights. Moments later, the heavy oak door creaked open. Elara stepped out, her face pale but her eyes burning with that same stubborn fire I remembered. Without warning, the air between us thickened, charged with the static of a bond that refused to die. "They're asleep," she whispered, leaning against the doorframe as if her legs could no longer hold her. "They have my eyes, Elara," I said, my voice thick. "Did you really think you could hide them forever? Deep down, you knew the truth. They were always going to find their way back to the Alpha." As the silence stretched, she looked at me with a mix of pity and defiance. "I wasn't hiding them from their father, Silas. I was hiding them from the king. Look at this place. It's a fortress of secrets. I wanted them to breathe fresh air, not the scent of court intrigue. What's worse, I couldn't even argue with her. In fact, the palace felt more like a prison than ever before." But then a sharp cough from the shadows interrupted us. Varric stepped into the light, his eyes darting between us like a snake looking for a gap in the armor. "A touching reunion, sire," Varric said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Despite that, we have a kingdom to save. If the shadow healer is truly who she says she is, she should begin her work immediately. The plague wards are overflowing." As her wolf stirred, Elara straightened her back. She didn't look like a prisoner. She looked like a general preparing for battle. "I will work, but I want a guarantee of their safety. If a single hair on their heads is touched, the cure dies with me." As if fate demanded it, I stepped between her and Varric, my shadow looming over the Archduke. "Their safety is my blood oath. Now go. Do what you came here to do." Chapter 5. The Clinical Cold. The plague ward was a nightmare of yellowed skin and the sickly sweet smell of decay. I stood in the doorway, watching Elara move among the dying with a grace that was almost divine. As if pulled by a string, I followed her, my presence a silent guard against the desperation of the sick. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't save them all. I watched her hand tremble as she covered the face of a young boy who had lost the fight. At that moment, her vulnerability hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just a healer, she was carrying the weight of the entire kingdom on her shoulders. "Why didn't you send a word?" I asked, my voice a low rasp. "When the twins were born, why didn't you trust me?" Before she could move, she turned to me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Trust you? You were the Alpha who executed 3 rogues in the town square the week before I left. You were becoming the monster everyone feared, Silas." As her pulse raced, the accusation hung in the air. Truth be told, I had been ruthless, I had been cold. But I thought I was protecting her. Instead, I had driven her into the arms of the wilderness. "I was trying to keep the borders safe for you," I roared, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "And in doing so, you made the world unsafe for me," she replied, her voice hauntingly quiet. Beneath the moonlight filtering through the high windows, I saw the truth of her words. My ruthlessness had been a shield that turned into a cage. Soon after, she turned back to her cauldron, her movements jagged and sharp. As the silence roared, I realized that winning her back would be a harder battle than any war I had ever fought. Chapter 6. The bitter tincture days bled into nights, and the tension in the Citadel was a coiled spring ready to snap. I spent my hours watching the twins from the shadows, learning the way they laughed and the way they tilted their heads just like I did. Even so, the Archduke was moving in the dark, Without thinking, I entered Elara's lab late one evening. She was hunched over a microscope, her brow furrowed in concentration. Moments later, she looked up holding a small vial of blue liquid. "Silas, look at this," she said, her voice urgent. As I moved closer, the space between us burned. I could smell the herbs on her skin, mixed with that intoxicating clary sage. Because of that, it was hard to focus on anything else. "The medicine the council has been distributing," she explained, her fingers brushing mine as she handed me the vial. "It's not just ineffective. It's an accelerant. It's making the plague spread faster in the noble houses." Her world tilted, and so did mine. As the truth unraveled, I felt a cold fury settle in my gut. This wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a coup. Not only that, but it meant the council was willing to kill our people to destabilize my throne. "Varric," I hissed, the name tasting like poison. "He's using the fear to turn the people against you," Elara said, her eyes wide. "And now that I'm here, he's going to use me as the scapegoat." Just like that, everything changed. The shadow healer wasn't just here to cure the sick. She was a target. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, I reached out and cupped her face, my thumb tracing her lower lip. "I won't let him touch you, Elara. Not again." As the bond pulsed, she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into my palm, a soft sigh escaping her lips. In the stillness that followed, I knew that the political game was over. It was time for the Alpha to hunt. The Great Hall was packed with the elite of Blackwood, their faces twisted with suspicion and fear. Varric stood at the center of the room, holding a scroll sealed with the Council's ancient crest. As the wind shifted, I felt the predatory energy in the room. "Sire," Varric began, his voice echoing with calculated authority. "The laws of the land are clear. A rogue Omega who bears children outside of the Pack's record is a threat to the bloodline. We demand a trial of blood for these heirs." To make things worse, he looked directly at Elara, who was standing beside the twins. Before the words left his lips, I felt my wolf snarl. A trial of blood was a brutal, ancient ceremony meant to prove lineage through physical dominance. "They are my children," I said, my alpha voice vibrating through the floorboards. "No trial is necessary." "The law says otherwise, Silas," Varric countered, his smile widening. "Unless, of course, the king is too afraid that the blood will show a different story." As the tension broke, the room erupted into murmurs. He was questioning their legitimacy in front of the entire court. As her name left his lips, Elara stepped forward, her head held high. "Let them do it," she said, her voice clear as a bell. "Elara, no," I growled, turning to her. "They are your sons, Silas. Let the blood prove it so we can end this charade," she insisted. Maybe it was fate, but I saw the resolve in her eyes. She wanted to be done with the hiding. So I signaled for the priest. As the air thickened, the twins were led to the center of the room. A small silver bowl was placed on the altar. With every heartbeat, I felt the stakes rising. If the blood didn't bond, Varric would have the legal right to exile them. Or worse. The moment their eyes locked with mine, I saw my own strength reflected back. The priest pricked their fingers, and the drops of blood fell into the bowl. As if summoned, I added my own. Between one breath and the next, the liquid didn't just mix, it ignited. A soft, amber glow filled the bowl, the light reflecting in the eyes of everyone in the hall. As fire bloomed, the proof was undeniable. Yet Varric's face didn't show defeat. It showed a new, more dangerous plan. As the sky darkened outside the windows, I realized the trial of blood was just a distraction. The real attack was already underway. Chapter 7. The Healer's Defiance. The amber glow from the blood bowl was still burned into my retinas, but the victory tasted like ash. Even as the court bowed to their new princes, I could see the wheels turning in Varric's head. What followed was a swift transition from ceremony to chaos. Elara was whisked away to the isolation wards before I could even touch her, cited under a purification protocol that Varric had pulled from the dusty archives. Because of that, I spent the night pacing the healer's wing, my senses dialed to an agonizing frequency. I could hear the twins breathing in the next room, their heartbeats steady and rhythmic, like a drum keeping me sane. Yet the silence from the plague wards was louder. As the silence stretched, I realized that Varric wasn't just trying to take my throne. He was trying to starve my soul. Moments later, a frantic scratching at my door broke my trance. It was a young apprentice, her eyes wide with terror and her uniform stained with blue tincture. "Sire, the Queen. She found something. You have to come." Without thinking, I followed her through the winding, torch-lit corridors. The Citadel felt different tonight, heavy as if the stones themselves were holding their breath. As the wind shifted, the metallic scent of the plague ward hit me, but beneath it was something sharper. Chemical. I found Elara hunched over a row of bodies, her hands covered in a strange, shimmering residue. Before the words left her lips, I saw the rage in her eyes. It was a cold, clinical fury that matched my own. "It's not a mutation, Silas," she said, her voice a jagged whisper. "The new batch of medicine Varric brought in this morning. It's laced with crushed nightshade root. It's not curing them. It's paralyzing their lungs so they look like they've died of the plague." Which meant that every death in the last 12 hours was a murder. As the truth unraveled, my wolf let out a low, vibrating grrr roll that shook the vials on the table. Because of his greed, my people were being buried alive. Chapter 8. The mask slips. The tension in the ward was a physical weight, but Elara didn't flinch. She grabbed my hand, her skin hot against my cold palm. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she led me to the back of the lab, where a single vial of dark, oily liquid sat under a magnifying glass. "This is the antidote I've been working on," she explained, her voice trembling with exhaustion. "But I need the base formula from the royal apothecary to stabilize it. Varric has it locked under a council seal." Truth be told, I had given Varric that power years ago when I thought I was too broken to care about the details of the state. As a result, I was now the one barred from my own cupboards. Still, a king doesn't ask for keys. "I'll get it," I said, my alpha voice beginning to thrum with the need for violence. But then, the doors to the lab swung open with a violent thud. Varric stood there, flanked by 6 guards in heavy plate armor. He wasn't smiling anymore. The mask of the loyal servant had finally slipped, revealing the predator beneath. "I'm afraid the apothecary is closed for sanitary inspection, sire," Varric said, his tone dripping with indulgent condescension. "More importantly, the council has just voted. Due to your emotional proximity to the rogue healer, your command over the medical response has been suspended." Before she could move, the guards stepped forward, their spears leveled at Elara's chest. At that moment, I realized I had been played. The trial of blood wasn't just to prove the twins' lineage, it was to prove my instability to the council. "Step away from her, Varric," I warned, my claws extending as I stepped in front of Elara. "Or what, Silas?" Varric countered, his eyes glinting with malice. "Will you kill your own council in front of these witnesses? Prove to the kingdom that you've truly gone feral?" Chapter 9. The gilded cage snaps. As the tension broke, I felt Elara's hand on my back, a silent plea for restraint. She knew that if I spilled blood here, Varric would win the narrative. He'd label me a tyrant and her a witch. Instead, I forced my claws to retract, though the effort made my knuckles bleed. "Take her to the North Tower," Varric commanded the guards, "and bring the children to the council chambers. They need to be briefed on their new status." "Touch them and you die," I said, my voice so low it was barely a breath. Yet, the threat carried the full weight of my alpha authority. No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't hide her terror as they grabbed her arms. As if pulled by a string, our eyes locked. In that split second, a bond flare ignited between us, a psychic explosion of her fear, her love, and her absolute trust in me. "Find the formula, Silas," she mouthed as they dragged her toward the door. As the silence roared in the empty lab, I was left standing among the dying. What followed was a realization that hit me like a physical blow. I had spent 5 years building a fortress to keep people out, but all I had done was trap myself inside with a snake. Deep down, I knew the truth. I couldn't play by the council's rules anymore. Because of that, I turned toward the hidden passage behind the fireplace, a route only the kings of Blackwood knew. The air in the secret tunnels was damp and smelled of ancient dust. I moved with the silence of a hunting wolf, my senses tracking every vibration in the citadel above me. Moments later, I reached the wall behind the royal apothecary. As the silence stretched, I listened. I could hear the clinking of glass and the hushed voices of Varric's men inside. They weren't inspecting the medicine, they were destroying the evidence. Without thinking, I pressed the hidden latch and stepped into the room. Just like that, everything changed. The 2 chemists inside froze, a crate of nightshade root half emptied on the floor. Before they could speak, I was upon them. I didn't use a blade. I used the sheer, overwhelming pressure of my alpha presence to pin them against the wall. "The formula!" I commanded. "Now!" As her name left his lips, one of the chemists stammering Elara's name in a plea for mercy, I realized the depth of the conspiracy. They had been told Elara was the one who poisoned the well, which meant my people didn't just hate her, they were being taught to fear her. By the time I found the ledger, my heart was racing with a new kind of urgency. I had the proof. I had the formula. But as I looked out the narrow window toward the North Tower, I saw the torches of the city guard surrounding it. She didn't know what scared her more, the plague or the man she'd left behind. But Elara was about to find out that the Iron Sovereign was gone. In his place was a mate who would burn the world to bring her home. As the sky darkened with an approaching storm, I realized the trial of blood was over. The trial of fire was just beginning. Chapter 10. The Wolf's Gambit. The royal apothecary smelled of ozone and shattered glass, but my focus was a laser beam on the ledger in my hand. I tucked the ancient book against my chest, feeling the sharp corners dig into my ribs like a reminder of my failure. What followed was a frantic dash back through the narrow stone arteries of the palace. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, whispering of Varric's treachery. Because of that, I didn't take the main stairs. I scaled the service lift's ropes, my muscles screaming as I hauled my weight upward toward the royal kennels. Yet, my mind was already in the North Tower, imagining Elara cold and alone. As the silence stretched, I reached the top floor, the heavy iron door swinging open to reveal a dozen pair of glowing eyes. Moments later, the lead wolf of the palace pack, a massive gray beast named Håkon, padded toward me. He didn't see a king, he saw an alpha in distress. Without thinking, I dropped to one knee and let him catch the scent of the ledger and the scent of the nightshade poison. "They are killing the pack from within, Håkon," I whispered, my voice a jagged rasp. "Guard the twins. If anyone but me or Elara tries to enter their chambers, tear them apart," which meant I was officially declaring war on my own guard. As the wind shifted, Håkon let out a low, vibrating grrrl of understanding. Because of the bond between our species, I knew the children were safe for now. But then, the sound of a distant bell began to toll, the signal for an emergency council session. Chapter 11. The Tower of Silence. Rain began to lash against the obsidian walls of the North Tower, turning the stone into a slick, unclimbable mirror. I stood at the base of the spiral stairs, my hand resting on the hilt of my sword. As her pulse raced, I could feel Elara's fear through the tether of our bond. I realized the guards at the door were not my men. They wore the colors of the High Council. "Step aside," I commanded, my alpha voice vibrating through the rain-soaked air. No matter how hard she tried, the bond flare wouldn't let me breathe until I reached her. The 2 guards crossed their halberds, their faces hidden behind steel visors. In fact, they didn't even flinch. So I didn't give them a second warning. Before she could move, I was a blur of silver and shadow. I didn't kill them. I wasn't ready to give Varric that ammunition. But I broke their grip on the door with a strength born of 5 years of repressed longing. Just like that, everything changed. I kicked the door open, the wood splintering under my boot. I found Elara standing by the narrow window, her silhouette framed by a flash of lightning. She looked small, but when she turned, her eyes were like twin ambers burning in the dark. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, she ran to me, her hands clutching the front of my wet tunic. "Silas, you shouldn't be here," she sobbed, her voice a mix of relief and terror. "Varric is telling the council you've gone feral. He's moving to strip your title now." "Let him try," I growled, pulling her into the hard plane of my chest. Beneath the moonlight of the storm, I felt the space between us burn. I didn't just want to save her, I wanted to consume her. Chapter 12, The Midpoint Shift. The air in the small stone room thickened as I pulled the ledger from my tunic. Elara's eyes darted over the pages, her fingers flying across the ink as she read the chemist's notes. Moments later, she let out a breath that sounded like a prayer. "This is it," she whispered. "The formula and the signature. Silas, this isn't just Varric. Look." As I moved closer, she pointed to a seal at the bottom of the page. It wasn't the council's mark. It was the crest of the Southern Kingdom, our oldest rival. As the truth unraveled, the stakes didn't just rise, they exploded. This wasn't a coup. It was an invasion. Varric was selling our souls to a foreign crown. Suddenly, the door behind us slammed shut, and the heavy iron bolt slid into place from the outside. As her name left his lips, Varric's voice echoed through the small iron grate in the door. "A beautiful discovery, isn't it?" Varric chuckled, the sound distorted by the stone. "Too bad no one will ever hear it. By morning, the Shadow Healer will be blamed for the king's unfortunate frenzy and subsequent execution. 2 birds, 1 stone. To make things worse, I heard the distinct sound of oil being poured against the wooden base of the door. At that moment, I realized the midpoint of this game had passed. I wasn't just fighting for a cure anymore. I was fighting to keep us from being burned alive in our own history. "Silas," Elara whispered, her eyes wide as the smell of smoke began to drift under the door. Chapter 13. The Bond Aflame. As the tension broke, I didn't look at the door. I looked at Elara. The fire wasn't just outside. It was in the way her soul answered mine. As if pulled by a string, I gripped her waist, pulling her flush against me. If this was the end, I wasn't going to die with things left unsaid. "I never stopped looking for you," I rasped, my forehead resting against hers. "Every night for 5 years, I searched the wind for your scent." As the bond pulsed, she reached up, her fingers tangling in my hair. "I was so scared, Silas. I thought you'd hate them. I thought you'd see them as a weakness." "They are my only strength," I replied. And just like that, the ice that had encased my heart for years didn't just melt. It evaporated. Because of her, I wasn't an Iron Sovereign. I was a mate. Without another word, I turned toward the window. The drop was 50 feet into the churning black waters of the moat. As if fate demanded it, I wrapped my cloak around Elara, tying her to my back with the leather straps of my armor. "Trust me?" I asked. "Always," she breathed into my neck. Between one breath and the next, I leaped. The air roared in my ears as we plummeted toward the dark. As the sky darkened with the smoke of the burning tower above us, I felt the water hit like a sheet of lead. But then, we surfaced, the cold river pulling us away from the Citadel and toward the only place we could regroup, the Whispering Woods. As the silence roared behind us, I knew Varric thought we were dead, which meant we had exactly 6 hours to brew the antidote and return to claim the crown. The hunter was now the prey, and the king was coming for his blood. Chapter 14. The Wolf's Pact. The Whispering Woods lived up to their name as we crawled from the freezing river, the trees groaning like old men sharing secrets. I dragged Elara onto the muddy bank, my lungs burning with the effort of the swim. What followed was a moment of raw, unshielded vulnerability as I checked her over for injuries. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization of how close I had come to losing her again. Because of that, my alpha instincts were screaming, demanding I find a cave and hide her away from the world forever. Yet, Elara pushed herself up, her eyes landing on the leather satchel still gripped in my hand. The ledger was wet, but the pages were thick parchment. The secrets within were still readable. Moments later, she looked at me, her hair matted with river silt but her spirit unbroken. "We have the formula, Silas, but I need the silver leaf fern. It only grows in the deep groves where the soil is untouched by the Citadel's rot." Without thinking, I stood up and offered her my hand. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, I pulled her up, the space between us crackling with a new, definitive commitment. We weren't just running anymore. We were a unit. In fact, I realized that the ruthless king I had been was a shadow compared to the man standing in this forest. "I know the grove," I said, my voice a low, steady vibration. "But we have to move fast. Varric will have the hounds out by dawn." As the silence stretched, we moved deeper into the woods. Because I was born of this land, the trees seemed to part for us, their branches shielding our heat from any airborne trackers. Still, the weight of the twins' safety pressed on my heart like a lead weight. I had left them with Hokan, but even a wolf pack could be overwhelmed by steel and fire. The deep grove was a cathedral of ancient oaks and glowing moss. At the center, the silver-leaf fern shimmered like a ghost in the moonlight. As if pulled by a string, Elara knelt beside the plant, her fingers moving with a surgeon's precision. She wasn't just a mother or a mate in this moment. She was the savior of a dying kingdom. Soon after, the sounds of the forest changed. The birds stopped chirping, and a heavy, unnatural stillness settled over the clearing. No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't hear the danger, but my ears twitched at the distinct clink of a crossbow being cocked. "Get down!" I roared, throwing my body over hers. Between one breath and the next, a bolt hissed through the air, burying itself in the trunk of the oak behind us. As her pulse raced, I saw the glint of steel through the ferns. It was Varric's personal hit squad, the Iron Fangs. They weren't just soldiers. They were assassins trained to kill shifters. "He sent his best," I hissed, drawing my blade. The metal sang as it caught the moonlight. To make things worse, I could feel the poison in the air. They were using nightshade-laced smoke pots to dull my senses. In that moment, I realized this was the point of no return. If I didn't hold this grove, Elara wouldn't finish the antidote and our children would be next. "Finish it, Elara," I commanded, my alpha voice booming through the trees. "Don't look back." As the sky darkened with the drifting smoke, I charged. I didn't fight like a king. I fought like a beast. I tore through the first line of assassins with a ferocity that made even the Iron Fangs hesitate. But then, a second bolt found its mark, grazing my shoulder and sending a jolt of liquid fire through my veins. Chapter 15. The Blood Sacrifice. I stumbled, the world tilting as the nightshade in the bolt began to work on my nervous system. I could see the assassins closing in, their eyes cold behind their masks. As the silence roared in my ears, I looked back at Elara. She was crushing the silver leaf into a mortar, her eyes fixed on her work, ignoring the chaos around her. Deep down, I knew the truth. My life was a small price to pay for the seconds she needed. Because of that, I forced my body to shift. Not a full transformation, which would take too long, but a partial, agonizing surge of power. My claws lengthened, and my teeth sharpened into lethal points. "Mine!" The roar that left my throat wasn't human. It was a declaration of war against anyone who dared to threaten my mate. Without warning, the first assassin lunged. I caught his blade with my bare palm and snapped the steel like a dry twig. As fire bloomed, I became a whirlwind of teeth and shadow. I was a monster, a nightmare, a wall of fur and fury that no man could pass. Just like that, everything changed. Elara let out a cry of triumph, holding up a small vial of clear, glowing liquid. "I have it, Silas! The stabilizer is done!" As if fate demanded it, the remaining assassins saw the vial and realized their mission had failed. They retreated into the shadows, but not before throwing one last parting gift, a firebomb that ignited the dry brush around the grove. Before she could move, the clearing was a ring of fire. I collapsed to my knees, the poison finally slowing my heart. As the bond pulsed, Elara was there, her hands on my face, her scent of clary sage fighting through the smoke. "Drink this," she whispered, tilting the vial to my lips. "It's the raw base. It will burn out the poison." The liquid felt like molten silver sliding down my throat. For a second, I thought my heart would stop. But then a surge of pure, crystalline energy exploded in my chest. The nightshade fog cleared, and my wounds began to knit together with supernatural speed. As her name left his lips, I pulled Elara into a kiss that tasted of smoke and victory. We were covered in soot and blood, but we were alive. More importantly, we held the power to end Varick's reign in our hands. "We go back tonight," I said, my voice crackling with a new, dark resolve. "No secret tunnels, no hiding. We walk through the front gate and we show them what a king looks like when he has his queen by his side." As her wolf stirred, Elara nodded, her hand gripping the vial of the cure, which meant the time for defensive plays was over. Varick had tried to burn us in the tower, and he had tried to execute us in the woods. So he had left us no choice but to bring the fire back to his doorstep. That night we didn't sleep. We moved through the forest like ghosts, gathering the few loyalists who had fled the city during the plague. As the truth unraveled among the soldiers, that their plague was a poison, the rebellion ignited. Moments later, we stood at the edge of the tree line, looking up at the obsidian walls of the Citadel. The lights were burning in the council chamber. Varick was likely preparing his coronation speech. As the silence roared one last time, I looked at Elara and the small army behind us. "Ready?" I asked. "For everything," she replied. As if the world narrowed to just the two of us, I took her hand. Between one breath and the next, we stepped out of the shadows. The final push had begun, and the Citadel was about to learn that some bonds are forged in fire and can never, ever be broken. Chapter 16. The Crumbling Frontier. The obsidian gates of the Citadel loomed like the jaws of a titan, but they didn't open for their king. I stood at the threshold, Elara's hand trembling within mine, and for the first time, my alpha voice found no purchase against the steel. What followed was a chilling silence that echoed through the valley. Varick hadn't just taken the throne. He had rewritten the laws of the stones themselves, branding me a feral threat to be shot on sight. Because of that, the loyalist soldiers behind me began to shift their weight, their confidence wavering under the sights of 100 crossbows lined up along the battlements. Yet, I stepped forward, my chest heaving with a mixture of poison remnants and pride. As the silence stretched, a single figure appeared on the balcony, Varick, draped in my royal furs, holding a golden chalice that caught the moonlight. Moments later, he didn't offer a parley. He offered a horror. He signaled to the guards, and they dragged two small, struggling figures to the edge of the stone railing. Without warning, the world turned to ice. It was the twins. Håkon, my lead wolf, was slumped in a cage beside them, his silver fur matted with blood. "The king is dead!" Varick's voice boomed, magically amplified to reach every ear in the city. "This beast before you is a changeling, a monster lured back by a witch to steal your souls. If he takes one more step, the tainted heirs follow their mother's legacy into the moat," which meant my plan to storm the gate was a death sentence for my children. As the wind shifted, I felt Elara's grip tighten until her nails drew blood from my palm. Because of my arrogance, I had led her back into a slaughterhouse. Chapter 17. The Shattered Cure. No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't suppress the sob that ripped from her throat. In that moment, the shadow healer was gone, replaced by a mother watching her world hang by a thread. As her pulse raced, she reached into her satchel for the vial, the glowing silver cure that was our only leverage. "Varric!" she screamed, her voice cracking the stillness. "I have the cure. If you kill them, you kill the only hope for the noble houses. The plague is yours, but the life is mine." But then, Varric did something I never expected. He laughed. It wasn't a villain's boast. It was the sound of a man who had already burned the bridge behind him. In fact, he didn't want a cure. He wanted a graveyard he could rule over. Before she could move, a sniper's bolt, not aimed at me, but at the vial, hissed through the air. Just like that, everything changed. The glass shattered in Elara's hand, the silver liquid spraying across the muddy ground, soaking into the dirt where it was useless. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara fell to her knees, clawing at the mud as if she could gather the light back into her palms. What's worse, the loyalist soldiers behind us saw the hope disappear into the earth. They began to retreat, the fear of the plague and the king's madness finally breaking their resolve. "It's gone, Silas," she whispered, her eyes vacant and hollow. "Everything. It's all gone." Chapter 18, The Dark Night of the Soul. The rain returned, a cold, mocking drizzle that washed the last of the silver glow into the gutters. As the tension broke, our army melted into the woods, leaving me and Elara alone in the killing zone before the gates. To make things worse, the guards on the wall began to jeer, throwing stones down at the feral king and his witch. As if pulled by a string, I scooped Elara up and retreated into the shadow of a nearby ruins. We sat in the damp darkness of a collapsed guardhouse, the smell of wet stone and failure thick in the air. Moments later, the weight of 5 years of logic and iron came crashing down on me. Deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't a king. I wasn't even an alpha. I was a man who had built a cage so perfect that even my love couldn't survive it. Because of that, I let out a sound I hadn't made since I was a pup, a long, low howl of absolute despair. "I failed them," I rasped, my forehead resting against the cold, damp wall. "I told you I'd protect you, and I led you to your death. I led our children to a madman." As the bond pulsed, I felt nothing but her grief. There was no spark, no fire. The dark night of the soul had arrived, and it was blacker than any obsidian wall. Truth be told, I wanted to give up. I wanted to walk to the gate and let them kill me just to stop the aching in my chest. Chapter 19, The Ashes of Mercy. As the silence roared, Elara didn't comfort me. She didn't tell me it was okay. Rather, she sat there in the mud, her hands stained with the dirt of the lost cure. Yet, as the minutes turned to hours, I saw her fingers begin to move. She wasn't clawing the ground anymore. She was touching the few blades of grass that had been touched by the silver liquid. "Silas," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Don't," I said. "There's nothing left, Elara." "Look at the grass," she insisted. Beneath the moonlight, I looked. The grass wasn't dying. Even without the full vial, the few drops that had touched the earth were causing the weeds to grow with a vibrant, unnatural strength. As fire bloomed in my mind, I realized what she was seeing. The cure wasn't just in the vial. The formula was in her head, and the ingredients were in our blood. But then, a new shadow fell over the ruins. It was Hokan. He had escaped, his side torn open, limping toward us with a scrap of parchment in his teeth. As her name left his lips, if a wolf could speak, he dropped the note. "The trial of blood concludes at dawn. The bastards burn at first light." As if fate demanded it, I looked at the sky. The horizon was already turning a bruised, sickly purple. We had less than an hour, which meant we were at our lowest point with no army, no cure, and no time. "I can't do this alone," I whispered to the dark. "You aren't alone," Elara said, standing up and wiping the mud from her face. Her internal flaw, the martyr's delusion, was finally dead. She wasn't trying to save them by herself anymore. She was looking at me as her partner. As the sky darkened before the final dawn, I stood up. I was broken, bleeding, and hunted. But then, I felt a growl rise in my throat that didn't come from my wolf. It came from my soul. As if the forest watched, I realized that if I was going to lose everything, I was going to do it while biting the throat out of the world. The bruised purple of the horizon was a countdown to a funeral, but the air in the ruins had changed. What followed was a frantic, desperate focus as Elara grabbed my hands, her palms still stained with the mud of our failure. Because of that, she didn't look like a defeated runaway. She looked like a queen claiming her power. "The vial is gone, Silas, but the blueprint is in my mind," she whispered, her voice a sharp blade in the dark. "And the most potent ingredient, the one Varric couldn't synthesize, is the Alpha's essence. It's the blood of a fated pair." Truth be told, I didn't care if she needed every drop in my veins. As the silence stretched, I realized that my Iron Sovereign logic had been wrong. I didn't need a crown to lead. I needed a heart to fight. Soon after, I bared my forearm, the skin pale and scarred under the moonlight. "Take what you need," I commanded, my alpha voice returning with a low, resonant thrum. Without thinking, she used a jagged shard of the broken vial to nick my skin, then her own. As the bond pulsed, we pressed our wounds together, our blood mingling in a rhythmic, golden heat. Maybe it was fate, but the sensation wasn't one of pain. It was an explosion of clarity. In the span of a breath, the silent bond that had been a hollow ache for 5 years roared back to life, linking our thoughts in a telepathic storm of resolve. Chapter 20. The Whispering Rebellion. As if summoned by the flare of our combined power, shadows began to detach themselves from the trees. It wasn't Varric's men. It was the infected, the lords and commoners who had fled to the woods to die. What's worse, they were armed with nothing but farming tools and the fury of the betrayed. "We saw the silver light," an old soldier rasped, stepping into the ruin. "We saw the king fall, and we saw him stand back up." Because they had nothing left to lose, they were the perfect army. Not only that, but Elara began to move among them, touching their brows with our mingled blood. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the amber tint in their eyes didn't vanish, but the pain did. It was a temporary stabilization, a battle cure that would give them 1 hour of strength. "I can't save your lives yet," Elara told them, her voice echoing with a new, terrifying authority. "But I can give you the strength to take back your home." Moments later, Hokan let out a short, sharp bark of approval. As the wind shifted, I felt the shift in the atmosphere. We weren't a desperate couple anymore. We were the spark of a revolution. Yet, the sun was beginning to peek over the obsidian walls of the Citadel. As the sky darkened for the last time before the sunrise, I gathered the survivors. We had no siege engines, no heavy plates. Instead, we had the secret knowledge of the stone. As if pulled by a string, I led them toward the drainage grates beneath the north wall, the same tunnels I had used to escape. "Hokan will lead the diversion at the front gate," I explained, my eyes locked with Elara's. "When the torches ignite, we move through the apothecary. We don't stop for the guards. We go straight for the council chamber." No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. In that moment, I pulled her close, my nose dipping into the crook of her neck to catch that clary sage scent one last time. "I'm not losing you again," I vowed, my voice a growl. "You couldn't lose me if you tried, Silas," she replied, her soul answering mine through the bond. Just like that, everything changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. Before either could speak, the first horn of dawn sounded from the battlements. Chapter 21. The Ascent of the Damned. Between one breath and the next, the diversion began. Hokan and a dozen wolves let out a coordinated howl that sounded like 100, drawing the guards' attention to the main bridge. As the silence roared behind them, we slipped into the cold black water of the grates. With every heartbeat, I led the infected army up through the guts of the palace. As though fate whispered, the stones felt familiar now. No longer a prison, but a weapon I was wielding. What's worse, we could hear the chanting from above. The council was already beginning the purification of my heirs. "Faster," I urged, my claws digging into the stone. By the time we reached the apothecary's hidden hatch, the air was thick with the scent of burning incense and oil. As the tension broke, I burst through the floorboards, a shadow of fur and steel. The chemists inside didn't even have time to scream. As if the world narrowed, I saw the doors to the great hall. Behind them, Varric was holding the torch over my children. Because of the bond, I could feel the twins' terror and their sudden, sharp spike of hope. They smelled me. "Wait for my signal," I whispered to the infected lords. As her name left his lips, Varric's voice beginning the final prayer of execution, I kicked the doors open, and she let it happen, Elara stepping out beside me, our hands still entwined, our blood still warm. The final push was over. The reckoning had arrived. Chapter 22. The Law of the Pack. "Drop the torch." The command ripped through the great hall, vibrating the heavy glass chandeliers until they hummed with a death note. I stood in the doorway, a ghost returned from the river, my armor caked in mud and the blood of my enemies. What followed was a collective gasp that sucked the oxygen from the room as the council members recoiled. Varric stood over the silver bowl, the torch trembling in his hand, his eyes wide with the realization that the dead do not always stay buried. Because of that, the silence that followed was heavy with the scent of impending violence. Yet, I didn't look at the traitor, I looked at my children. The moment their eyes locked with mine, the twins let out a sob of pure relief, their small bodies straining against the guards holding them. As the bond pulsed, I felt their terror turn into a fierce primal pride. "The king is an infection," Varric screamed, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Kill him! Kill the witch!" But then, the doors behind me exploded inward as the infected lords charged into the hall. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara stepped forward, holding up her glowing, blood-stained palms. She didn't look like a rogue. She looked like a goddess of the harvest. In fact, when the guards saw the very lords they thought were dying standing tall and strong, they dropped their spears. Without thinking, I blurred across the floor. As the silence roared in my ears, I reached Varric before he could drop the flame into the oil. I didn't use my sword. I used my bare hand to catch his wrist, the bones snapping under my grip like a brittle twig. As if fate demanded it, the torch fell, but I caught it in midair, extinguishing the flame in the silver bowl of my own blood. Chapter 23. The Bitter Reckoning. As the tension broke, I threw Varric to the floor at the base of the throne. He looked up at me, his face a mask of sweating, pathetic greed. No matter how hard she tried, Elara couldn't hide the tears of rage as she gathered the twins into her arms, shielding them from the sight of the man who had tried to burn them. "You sold my people to the south," I said, my alpha voice dropping to a frequency that made the council members drop to their knees. "More importantly, you tried to murder the blood of my blood." Because the truth was now written in the amber glow of the infected who surrounded him, Varric had no lies left. In the span of a breath, he lunged for a hidden dagger in his boot. As her wolf stirred, Elara let out a sharp warning, but I didn't need it. Her body moved on instinct, and mine moved on justice. Before the words left his lips, I shifted, a full, violent transformation that shattered my breastplate. The massive black wolf of the Blackwood line stood where the king had been, a shadow of fur and ivory teeth. As if summoned, I didn't kill him. I pinned him with a single paw, my growl vibrating the very foundations of the Citadel. "The law of the pack is clear," I said, my voice echoing through the mind link of everyone present. "The penalty for treason is exile to the wastes. Let the plague you cultivated be your only companion." Chapter 24. The New Equilibrium. The morning sun finally broke over the obsidian spires, but it didn't find a kingdom of shadows. Come morning, the funeral pyres were extinguished, replaced by the scent of Elara's boiling herbs and the fresh, clean smell of rain. What's worse, or rather what was better, was that the Citadel gates remained open. As the truth unraveled, the people realized that the Shadow Healer was their queen. Moments later, I sat on the obsidian throne, but it didn't feel cold anymore. Elara sat beside me, her hand resting on the armrest, her fingers interlaced with mine. As the bond pulsed, I realized that the Iron Sovereign had finally died, and a king had been born. Truth be told, the healing would take years. Yet, as I watched the twins chasing Håkon through the royal gardens, I knew the bloodline was secure. Because of that, I turned to Elara, my thumb tracing the mark on her neck that had finally fully healed. "I spent 5 years building walls to keep the world out," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "And I spent 5 years running to keep the world away," she replied, her soul answering mine. "Maybe it was fate, but the woods always lead home, Silas." Epilogue. The Whispering Harvest. 1 year later, the Whispering Woods were no longer a place of ghosts. Beneath the moonlight, the royal summer retreat was filled with the sounds of laughter and the crackle of a hearth fire. The Amber Plague was a memory, a scar that reminded us of our strength. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Elara watched our daughter brew her first tonic, the little girl's amber eyes glowing with focused intensity. Soon after, our son tackled me into the grass, his small wolf form yapping with joy as he tried to catch my tail. And she let it happen, Elara leaning her head on my shoulder as we watched the future we had fought for. As if the world narrowed to just this clearing, I realized that safety wasn't found in shadows or obsidian walls. It was found in the warmth of a mate's breath and the scent of clary sage on the wind. Deep down, I knew the truth. I didn't find my family. I earned them. As the silence roared with peace, I closed my eyes and let the forest hold its breath, knowing that for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And just like that, everything changed. The